The Meze 105 AER headphones are the model that I have been looking for over 30 years. And if you think that's a long time to look for a pair of headphones, yes it is. And you're thinking, but wait, you have all these really expensive headphones behind you, and these are only about $400. Well, let me tell you my headphone journey story. And then, well, if you just want to skip to my impressions of the headphones themselves, I'll leave a chapter marker in the video. Anyhow, over 30 years ago, in the early 90s, my father had a nice hi-fi system. He actually had, now you've got to check these out, they're pretty interesting, Sonab speakers. Now, I don't know if this is before B&O or Bose, probably. These were kind of like speakers which had multi-directional tweeters, and they were interesting to say the least. Now, I wish I knew what they sounded like. I have no memory of them. But he replaced them with a pair of magnets in the end, and I remember a Luxman receiver, which, funnily enough, one of my patrons actually found. It may have even been mine, sitting on the side of a road down in Melbourne, and he just picked it up and it worked perfectly. Exactly the same model. And then later on, he got a second system for the living room. He had an office kind of like my setup here, and except without all the headphones and stuff. He was a writer. And then the second system for the living room consisted of a pair of Paradigm 9 SEs, and it was a Luxman system, a CD player, and integrated amplifier. Now, I went with him when he chose the Paradigms, and I remember we bought a pair of Paradigm Atoms, the version 1 for me, and I got his hand-me-down Pioneer integrated amp and a CD player of my own in the end. And it's funnily enough, he sort of said, we don't need a CD player. And I said, yes, we do. And he ended up owning more CDs than me. He used to take ABC FM radio and what he wanted to listen to on that, and he used to record it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, later a cassette player, or a cassette recorder as well, but that's going back a long way. And so the problem was, he went to bed at 8 p.m, and I was, either in the room my bedroom was next to my parents' bedroom, or I took the granny flat later on, so you can make jokes about me living in my parents' basement, but, back then anyway. This was university age, so yeah. And so I couldn't listen to music in the evening when I wanted to, so I said, you should buy me a nice pair of headphones. And what did he get me? Actually, I still have them. He bought a pair, this is them, the MB Quart QP55s, and they're still sort of made. They are called German Maestro now. And these are the original 55Xs, my original pair. And it's amazing, I still have them. The cable is kind of interesting. They look like Bayer Dynamics, it's because the engineers were related in Germany. I really love these things. But they had some issues. I mean, apart from being really lightweight, so they're really comfortable, and a lot of headphones feel really heavy after wearing these. These have like an elastic suspension system in there where the elastics kind of died, and the ear pads wore out, and that's how I ended up getting onto Headphi, because I didn't know what to choose. By that time, I'd moved to Japan. I wanted new headphones. I had no idea what to choose, so I went on to Headphi. And the problem with these is that they were not really ideal for how I use them. Now, I could plug them into a CD player. They have a 6.3mm connector. And I remember actually, incidentally, in the shop, they had a model of CD player, one above the one we bought for using in our home, and plugging it into the one we bought versus the one in the demo model. Well, this is both in the shop. I could hear a difference, and I thought I wanted my father to get the better model, but he refused, unfortunately. Well, it is what it is, but I heard differences between components back in the early 90s before you had online arguments about this stuff, so it is what it is. But we had a piano in the home, so I was used to subtle details of things. But the thing is, when I moved out of home finally, taking the whole hi-fi system was kind of, even with the Paradigm Atoms, was impossible. So I ended up plugging these into the back of whatever computer I had, which in the beginning of the century, turn of the century, it's funny to say that now, it was something like the back of a G3 or G4 Apple computer. And the problem with that is that, well, first of all, you have a 6.3mm socket, so I had to use an adapter. And then at full volume, they just don't get very loud. And so they were not ideal, and they didn't have much bass. They had a guide in with them, and I think German Maestro still has the guide about what music is suitable for which of their models. And they still make them pretty much the same headphones. So it's kind of fun to put them on occasionally and compare them and look back. But the thing is, now, I had so many headphones to choose from moving to Japan, but none of them were quite ideal. So I had Bear Dynamics sounded too bright for me. I ended up buying a pair of AKG K701s, which were too thin sounding for me. And then there was all this, you need an amp, you need a DAC, etc., etc. Sennheiser back in Australia, these were in the early 90s, about $200, discounted to $175. HD600s and HD650s were around $800 to $900 from memory. So that was totally out of the question. That would be well over $2,000 now. I don't know how Australian money compared back then, but probably still a lot lower than the US dollar. So in retrospect, I almost, if we'd had more money, I could have ended up take the meme, the HD650, which is just about a meme at this point, and I would have been like one of the first people, either be the first person ever on a Headfire to own a pair. But probably anyway. So, but coming back to the point, the Mezes, I think, meet the criteria that I would have really appreciated back in the 90s when I bought the QP55s, especially, or even after when I replaced. I think if I'd had these when I had found Headfire, or before I found Headfire, I would have never replaced them. Or if I'd had these back in the 90s, I would have never replaced them. I wouldn't be here. And this is the main point about them. The first thing, of course, about the 105s is they use the same setup that the 99 Classics do, except of course they're open backed. Much the same kind of setup, except much better driver. They have a custom designed driver which has some carbon fiber reinforced center, and they have the cool headband system which just pops straight on your head. The interesting thing is that compared to the 99 Classics, these still are marked left and right, but the actual 105 AERs are symmetrical, unlike say the 109s. The entry for the headphone cables is not recessed. It's completely flush with the bottom of the headphones, so that you can use any 3.5mm terminated, or I should say any cable that is terminated with a 3.5mm plug on the headphone end, as long as it's a stereo pair, because it won't use single entry. And that it means that it's useful for people who want to attach headsets. Now the cable itself, like the ones for say the 99 Classics, does have a kind of notch on the left-hand side. So if you are, say, picking them up at, in a dark room or at night or whatever, and you want to tell without having to look on the headphones themselves, especially considering they're all black, which is the left and the right, you can easily do so by feel. And that is a, fairly basic, I think it's about 2 meter long cable it comes with. One of the other things you can get is a boom mic, or you might call it a gaming headset, as Meze have their own now. And this headset is actually pretty neat looking. I think it's $79, and you can check on online if I made a mistake. This one, it's quite long. I think it's about 2 meters as well. It has metal plugs on the end, so it has a metal plug for connecting the 4-pole connector, because you need the microphone connection. And then on the headphone end, it has this cool microphone, which has a little metal end, and then it has little bits of metal here. And the cool thing is, and I'll plug it in to probably make more sense, the splitter is pretty neat as well. So of course it has like a basic volume control in the middle, but it's kind of classy looking. It has that kind of like fake leather texture on there, but then it has this really nice little switch which goes this little snappy click. Hope you can hear that. And it's a little bit of sophistication. I mean, it's got usual rubbery cable and everything, but with little bits of metal on there, it feels a little touch more sophisticated than kind of your average whatever gaming headset. But yeah, I mean, you can plug in any standard 3.5mm terminated headset if you want to use it for gaming as well. The main thing about them that makes them ideal is that they are very sensitive in terms of how much power they need to get to become loud. And that means they'll drive out of anything. And primarily, I mainly listened with them out of my MacBook Pro. I didn't use any of this fancy stuff behind me. Now, probably the fanciest thing I mostly used was something like this FIO QX13, which is in for review. That's like a USB dongle DAC. That's a pretty cool unit, actually. I'll talk about that in its own review. And only really to compare if I could hear any significant difference at all between the MacBook Pro and the output of the QX13 with the 105 AERs. And that's really to assess how far a pair of headphones will scale up in terms of equipment. Like, I wouldn't say buy a pair of 105 AERs and then use them with the expensive equipment. Obviously, that's a mismatch. So that's kind of mainly just to assess how much they change with better gear. But again, they'll power straight out of a computer, or even something like a USB, one of these USB dongle decks, which you can buy now. And the basic ones are all pretty good, which is a big change from, say, 5 years ago where basic ones were terrible. Even, Apple's Lightning connector, they'll power out of that. And that was the main primary thing takeaway I have with these is they look stylish. They have all the fancy metal bits. My teenage self would love this, having all the fancy molded parts, fancy metal bits. All of it can be disassembled and repaired if necessary as well. And the instant fit elastic headband. And if you're wondering about like the longevity of this elastic, I still have 2 pairs of 99 Classics, the black and the wood versions, and the elastic on them is fine. Now, granted, I haven't been using them, but I've never had high quality elastic deteriorate on me for years, basically. I don't think I've replaced a single elastic headband at all. I have replaced ear pads, and the cloth ear pads do have a good finger depth in them and do have enough depth that unless you have really large ears, they should fit comfortably. And they're plush and comfortable, and I don't think they're too expensive if you need to replace them. And they just readily pull off, and then probably new ones are a little bit fiddly to put on, and that's about it. But the whole thing is symmetrical, attractive, comfortable, and that's the first primary thing, along with the sensitivity. Now, the second thing is tuning. Now, the problem with my good old MB Quartz is they're kind of very light and thin sounding, which is not ideal, as most of the music I was listening to as a kind of teenager or university student was pop and rock. Now, let's just take something like Spoon, for example, which is, very like the kind of thing I might have been listening to back in university. That's probably more, I was listening to Van Halen mainly, I think around that time. And a lot of top of the pop stuff, I think a lot of, a lot of popular music in general. And the overall balance that the sound has with these is typical of Meze. Now, I've talked about the 109 Pros before. I've already reviewed those. The tuning of the 109 Pros is probably on the brighter side overall, still with good bass, but the 105s have a slightly warmer or darker tuning, with maybe a bit less treble and probably a little bit less resolution, though it's hard to tell because sometimes a reduction in treble can make it seem like a pair of headphones is less resolving. They do have different drivers, not quite as sophisticated as the ones in the 109s, and obviously everything's a little bit less sophisticated. Now, I'd probably call the tuning as being fairly neutral. Like, there's a good amount of bass. The mid-range is maybe typical kind of tuning of popular headphones such as Meze, Hi-Fi Man, and others. And the treble has enough treble there, but is not too bright, such that pop music, again, like Spoon or other things I've been listening to, doesn't come through too brightly when I have a brighter track on. It may be a little bit low for some people who want to hear more of the nuance in music such as classical or jazz or acoustic music. The other thing is the level of detail. There's not a large amount of kind of detail and separation that you might get out of something like a pair of planers. For example, in the sub $1,000 bracket, Hi-Fi Man having reduced their original ARIAs down to $599 or essentially $600, they are definitely more detailed and more nuanced than the 105 AERs and probably more than the 109 Pros as well. The difference there is that while you could say, hey, but for a couple of $100 more, you could get a pair of ARIAs, then comes the issue that, well, the ARIAs really could do with a good amount of amplification. And that's where the Meze has a real advantage. I can plug the 105 AERs into a computer, into a basic dongle DAC, into whatever, and I can enjoy myself listening. And that's what I found with these, is that whether I was listening to something which is fairly nuanced like Melody Gardot I've been listening with lately, or something more aggressive like Spoon, they can be really punchy. If I'm listening to a movie soundtrack, I did try these with the Hostile soundtrack. There's a track I use for testing, Cradle to the Grave, which has a lot of low bass. And it was actually fun. I've been using, the QX13 has a little meter on it that shows how much power is being used, and when the bass rumble comes in, watching the little numbers jump up has been quite entertaining. And that can actually get quite loud in terms of low bass, and it could actually get these at higher volumes to kind of vibrate almost. So it's a little bit overkill, but that they do low bass very well, something that my old MB Quartz certainly do not do well. Now, of course, they're not going to do as well as a planar, but again, I can get that rumble, I can get that entertainment, and I've only got the volume dial on my MacBook Pro at the halfway mark, which is something that can't be said for something like these MB Quartz and a lot of other headphones. And I'm still getting a good amount of bass, I'm still getting a good amount of dynamics, and what is more, I'm getting a good sense of soundstage. Even if it doesn't have the best instrument separation, I can still hear clearly where all the instruments are in the mix. There's still a good width and depth to it. Yeah, it's not up there with, all the headphones I'm used to listening with, but the thing is I can enjoy myself easily, especially when I just want to listen to music and don't think about it. That's where the Mezes have their best quality. Just like, say, the Empyreans or the Elites may not be the very best dynamic sounding headphones or the most detailed sounding headphones in their price brackets, but they're exceptionally well made, they look the part, and they don't require the kind of audiophilia nervosa about what you plug them into to get good performance out of them. Yeah, sure, they'll scale up to a degree out of better gear, but you can plug them into something simple, yeah, again, even a QX13, and still get a good listen because they are fairly sensitive and not super demanding about what you drive them with. So I have to say, if I had been a teenager again and got a pair of headphones, I think these would be ideal. They're not too colored that I would find them maybe too bright, like say Bad Dynamics. They're not too demanding like Sennheiser headphones like the HC600 and 650 are, or even my MB Quartz. And they just made whatever music I was playing, from classical through to modern rock, whatever, actually enjoyable to listen with. Again, not as enjoyable as, a high-end system, but they had that quality that I think if I'd got something like this before I joined HeadFi, I might not have joined HeadFi. So it's a strong recommendation for me for the 105 AERs. If you do have a pair and you're actually watching this out of curiosity, do leave your impressions in the comments below so that other people watching the video can get an idea, especially if they're looking to buy a product or not, and not just have my opinion, but have opinions and feedback from other people as well. Also, if you do decide to buy a pair, do consider clicking on one of the links in the description. That will help out as well. I'm not here to sell you a pair of headphones because those links only benefit my channel if a product is not returned. So if a person goes, Amos was completely wrong, and returns them, I don't get anything at all. Also, thank you to all my patrons. If you'd like to help support this channel, do consider becoming a patron or a caffeinator and buy me a coffee. And links to those are in the description as well. As always, thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to chatting with you online.